My name is Ando, and I'm an artist, a photographer, and a member of the Undergang. Every week, I sit down with an artist, a curator, a musician, an author, or anyone else working in the creative fields, and we talk about their work, their life, and what it takes to keep fighting the good fight in our world today. Welcome to the Undergang Armchair. Alright, Undergangers, welcome to episode 24. Here we go once again. We have Adam Jeppesen on the show this week, an excellent artist, a Dane who's breaking the mold. Kind of has a different story than your average Danish artist, and he'll tell us all about that. What's going on with us? Well, we checked out the 1,000 Books Art Book Festival this weekend, talked to some people, had a really good time. We're working on an episode about that for you guys. But in the meantime, we're going to Italy. We're going to go celebrate the resurrection of cousin JC there with, some Easter eggs and some depictions of rabbits. And I'm probably going to eat a steak. And I'll probably take a nap after that steak. But usually we go to Italy every Easter. And that's really the place to be, especially if you live in Denmark. So I am looking forward to that. I'm also going to photograph a project that I've been working on for a while. Gonna finally pull it off. It's been in the planning phases. So hopefully the weather will be agreeable for that. And, so I'll kind of be checked out there for a little while. But we'll keep active there on the Twitter for y'all. Went to a lot of shows last weekend, so gonna put up some more pictures of that. Went to the Eva Stenrum show at Peter Lau Gallery, which is kind of fitting because Adam Jeppesen is also represented by that gallery. So go check that one out. What else do we want to talk about here? Right, so Adam is clearly a talented photographer. He's a thinker. He obviously likes to be alone, and he's also a traveler. And, he talks about some of the epic journeys he's taken and his strange path finding out that he was interested in making photographic artworks and, where he's branching out to from there on. I must say Adam put up a heroic effort in order to come on this show. We actually recorded this several months ago. I've been kind of sitting on it because it's really good, but also because the circumstances were kind of strange. He was in town for a very short amount of time. He doesn't live here in Copenhagen anymore. And there was just scheduling, and he was busy and I was busy, and then finally we had a time we could do it, but there was nowhere to do it at, so I met him at the gallery, and we were going to do it at a cafe, but then the cafe closed, and the whole time I was just like, don't worry about it, man, we'll do it later, and he was like, no, we're doing this. So we wandered all over town, and finally settled on the Cinematheque, the National Cinema House. We were almost out of time, so we only got a half hour in. So the first half is recorded in the basement of the Cinematheque, and there is some background noise, some Looney Tunes or something, and people walking by. But we had a really good chat, and then, like I said, we ran out of time, and then the man put up a second heroic effort and met me at the airport before he had to leave for Argentina. So we're sitting in the second half in the corner of the airport, trying to pretend like we're not there. So, once again, we had a good talk, but there's a lot of noise. I guess you guys are used to the fact that the sound quality is always a little compromised in one way or another. But I do apologize once again. But the simple fact of it was such a good talk, and we got to some really good areas. I thought we'd share it anyways. In the beginning, we're just kind of chatting. We don't get to his work till later on, but we're talking about podcasts, and, that's of interest. Hope you guys like podcasts. So Adam, a talented photographer, a dogged interviewee, and an all-around hard worker, I would say. So enjoy the talk with Adam.
mean, good venture, especially for someone from the US. I don't know. I don't think Danes would take up something like doing a podcast.
I guess
the
not.
Podcasting has caught on,
It's
but not
slower
to the point
here,
where
that's
people
true.
are doing it. You know, not the idea that, hey, I could make it.
Well, that's the thing.
But then you gotta want to make the effort.
Sure, that's the thing.
Which is the thing that I find distinguishes. I don't know why that distinguishes, especially Americans, from anyone else. Is that thing that Americans go that extra step. If you're really into something, like my friend Billy, who married a Danish girl, lived here for a couple of years, and he was working for a company that was delivering like sausages, and he hated the job. And then one day we had like kind of a company together where we tried, it never worked out, but we tried having this company called White Walls that repaired walls for galleries. The idea was basically after every exhibition, like the guy who comes in and washes the windows, we'd come out, fix the walls, paint them, polish them, so the galleries just had to take down, put up again.
When was this?
No, that was like 6 years ago.
I love the shit people try to figure out when they want to be artists, but they don't know what to do. You know, the
no,
kind of
it
jobs.
was like, what could we do?
Yeah.
And he didn't want to be. Anyway, that didn't work out, but he still helped me, like, because he had that practical thing. Like, he used to be a shipbuilder. So when I had a couple of shows in Belgium, he came down, helped me construct walls because I did video installations. And then once we were down there and he started noticing all the bikes, he's like, you know, it's a really cool thing, this thing about cargo bikes. It's something that I think could catch on in the States. And so he kept like kind of rambling about it, and we were talking on and off, and he just kept like every time we were meeting, he'd gone like a little step further with it.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, I've come up with a company name. It's called Boxicles. And it's a bike that, like the Christiania bike, has the front, and then all the parts come inside it, and you just ship the box, and then then they assemble it. And it was like, that's a very good idea. He worked on it for a while, and then he came up with like, God, that was so difficult, like having to come up with a good design of a bike that could actually collapse, fit into a box. So he's like, fuck it, I'm just going to get in contact with Christiania bikes and say, listen, I'm really interested in using the frame, but I want to make another box because their box isn't that nice. Can we make another box? So he had these like bamboo boxes that were really nice. And then Christiania bike has been approached 1,000 times by different people over the years wanting to export it, and they've been like, no. But for some reason, because he had this entrepreneurship, which is so, I find to be very typical in the US, for the first time they were like, sure. Now he's the official like exporter of Christiania bikes to the US. He's like the only guy who like his company now exports or imports Christiania bikes to the US.
It's genius.
And it was just from this same kind of thought. It wasn't very calculated. It was like you say, like you buy this stuff, you make a couple of phone calls, and
well, it depends on what you think your time's worth. Of course, if you're willing to put it and stay up late working on something, sure, you can do a lot.
Sure, no, you got to have a passion for it, of course.
Totally. And for me, I just I like to talk. I like to meet people. And I listen to a ton of podcasts, and I just thought, you know what, this is so fucking easy. As long as I want to, right. Do it.
Right. No, I don't, unfortunately, listen. I always get very conservative and only listen to like 3. And I keep just listening to that.
Right. Podcast, though?
Podcasts.
Yeah.
Radio. I use radio every single day. Every single day when I'm working, it's radio. It's podcast. But it's usually like BBC World, just to get the news. Or KCRW. Which KCRW is they broadcast out of Santa Monica. Okay. But it's NPR combined with BBC. So you get these kind of strange news from California, Southern California. Like there's Logan's topics Southern California cares about. And it's like, but it's funny. But some of it's interesting to listen to, like what's going on in LA and things like that.
Totally. And
then it switches to BBC. And then you can listen to BBC. And then
you can hear what's going on in Africa and
Singapore, which is incredible.
There's a lot of shit.
They have such good programs on BBC. Yeah. And then, of course, This American Life.
Classic.
And then Radio-Lab. Uh-huh. And then I used to listen to Mark Maron. But then I couldn't take it anymore.
I listen to him in periods and then I burn out. But my show is totally like, he's the kind of guy where I was like, you know what?
Well,
some dude in a garage.
Because that's the guy at the cash farm.
Yeah. And so, fuck it, you can do this.
And for that, that's the thing that I find inspiring about it. And he's like gone the full way. Then he, started touring, buying a plane ticket, going to Louisiana to make an interview with some guy there.
Totally. And he's turned it into an empire, really.
He has, no? He has his own TV program now.
Yeah, he has his own TV program. His comedy's more popular than ever.
Really?
Yeah, he works full-time as a comedian, too, now. And he just
like such an idiot at times, though.
I know. It hurts. It hurts my birds. That's what I like to say in English. But like when someone does something that just is painful to listen to.
Just because he keeps, but I don't know. I guess that's also what it works sometimes. Self-punishment. That was funny in the beginning because I think it was genuine, and it might still be genuine. I haven't listened to him for a while. I'll give him a chance again.
There's a guy named Bill Burr who has a really funny podcast.
Who's also comedy?
Yeah.
Bill Burr?
Bill Burr, Burr. That's one of my favorites. He's just a cranky man.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He just talks about stuff. And his comedy is hilarious, but his ability to just talk for an hour every week and be as interesting as he is, and sometimes it's not as good, but other times it's great, is absolutely astounding. He just played here in Copenhagen.
Really?
Yeah. I haven't listened to NPR in a while.
It's good.
I know. It's the best. That's one thing that makes me angry is Danish radio.
Yes.
God bless them, but they really need to step their game up.
No, but also the music here, especially the music.
Fucking wretched.
I was driving into Copenhagen yesterday, and it was the first time I came across a radio that just played rock music. Like, the name of the station was like My Rock. Okay. It wasn't good. But at least they just played one type of music. The thing that usually gets me upset is like, you listen to a radio program or a radio, and then it's like it goes from like melodic pop to like semi-hard rock to hip hop. Like, there's no consistency.
And then it goes back to a song that was famous in 1992. And they had nothing else. That band. It was just that one song. Right. And you're like, I remember that. Why would he listen to this again?
I don't know. There should be a potential, I guess, for like smaller radio programs or radio stations.
Well, here's the question I have about it all as an American, because what we're talking about is like, Americans being more, what do you want to say, entrepreneurial or just kind of go-getter attitude. Do you think it's true that having a system which is more of a welfare state creates more laziness? I struggle with this constantly because I do not think the American model works terribly well in certain ways.
No, in certain ways it doesn't. I don't think it's that simple. I don't think it's black and white at all.
Is it cultural too?
It's cultural. I mean, the one thing which in the US either you fail by it or you completely gain by it is this thing that Americans are brought up with, that you can make it if you really want it.
Right. Anybody can make it.
Which isn't necessarily true. And at the same time, it is true.
Exactly.
It goes both ways. You literally, yes, you do actually have the possibility.
Right. But the odds are also stacked against you.
They're completely against you. But if you really want to, and you really, of course, your background is fairly stable, and there's many things that also need to have worked for you. Mm-hmm. Then you've kind of been brought up with that you can take it to that out of the box kind of way.
Totally.
Which in a place like Denmark, more or less everyone has the stability.
Right.
And in a way, I don't think that laziness comes from the welfare state, because people still work very hard here. It just doesn't necessarily have the same independent thought that I find that there can be in the US. That's the one.
In the US, you always have to figure out how you're going to do the new interesting thing that someone else hasn't done. There's a lot of that.
But again, that's generalizing, because I think you find that mentality on the coasts. I think you go to Minnesota.
True.
And True. I don't think that exists. I think the East and the West Coast, the Northeast generally the West Coast has a lust for innovation.
Yeah.
And people seem to get a kick from being innovative.
And
there's inspiration for it because you can see it actually does go places.
Right.
Whether you're within, like the IT business or any other kind of development, there's just this there's a huge motivation for actually, because you can see stuff happens from it.
Right. Well, I mean, if you invent Twitter, you can be one of the richest people in the country.
Sure, or even you get the patent for the little thing that is used for Twitter to function.
Right.
Like even that, it draws a lot of people that I want to make it, without having to where you can, I don't know, I find, and that's the thing that I often love about being in the US is you can get into discussions with people on fairly off topics, but people really get into it. Like they get into it. Yeah. Like you can sit at night, and just really get into some kind of an odd thought. Some of it can be completely useless. It can be theories on the clouds that you can't use for anything. And other things can be I've got this idea. Right. And then, because people are into talking also. And I think that goes far.
I actually really miss the chattiness in a way.
I can understand that.
Because people here say oh my God, it's so insincere, but I don't think it actually is. You have to, at certain points, be like, oh yeah, nice to see you, even though, you're never going to see them again or whatever. But the benefits far outweigh the negatives, I would say. Well,
I've always found that with the complaint of Americans don't really care when they ask, how are you? And often I've been but I don't really care if people really care. It just puts in a positive energy that you meet people with a positive, no, I mean, if you're not doing well, sure, I care. Tell me about it. But I'm not expecting you to tell me that.
Right. Well, the other thing is it's okay to say, I'm all right. I'm not great.
Yeah.
And people are oh, it's too bad. Anyways.
Right.
It's not oh, shit. I mean, you run into, of course, people who are yeah, dude, my mom just died. And, you're checking groceries and you're just I'm not in a position to really engage you on this level right now.
Right.
But it's so much better than the way Danes act in supermarkets, for example.
Yeah. It's funny. It's the same things that I find that everyone, my friend Billy there, he said the supermarkets was also always a topic of his frustrations. He's
brutal.
Going to the supermarket.
It's fucking brutal, dude.
Threw him off every time.
All right, but we really need to talk about you. That's what we're here to do. We got a limited amount of time. Let's breeze through the beginning. Where'd you grow up?
I was born in Denmark. I was born in a small town about 2.5 hours outside of Copenhagen.
Okay.
Until I was 6. And then when I was 6 or 7, I moved to the US, to New York.
Oh.
And then I kind of grew up in New York until I moved back to Denmark and finished high school, the end of middle school, high school in Denmark. In
New York City or what?
No, outside of New York, in Westchester. So just on the other side.
Is that family work kind of deal?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we were living there. So it's, I don't know, that's kind of always put the duality of where do I belong.
Mm-hmm. I know exactly.
And which has resulted in having traveled a lot, both me and my brother and my sister. Mm-hmm. Now my brother lives in New York, has moved back there. My sister lives in Norway.
Do you guys have American passports?
No. No, because, I mean, I guess there's lots of people who go. I think we were there just long enough that if we'd stayed one more year, we could have gotten a green card.
Right.
But I think my parents kind of said, okay, if we don't go back now, it's going to be too late.
These kids won't be Danish.
No, my brother and my sister had moved back because they went back to finish university or go to university in Denmark.
Much
good
cheaper,
reasons.
Much cheaper.
Right. And I was because I'd lived, there's difference if you move there as a young child or if you move there as a teenager. And having moved there as a young child, I think my parents just looked at it and was let's get back to Denmark.
That's essentially what happened to me. My parents moved to Denmark, and then after a while, we're like, yeah, we got to go back to California.
Right. Yeah.
But did you want to come back, or were you upset about coming back, or
no?
That's just what happened?
It's kind of what happened.
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, I'm sure at the time it might have looked different.
Yeah.
But at the same, I guess I didn't want to be moving back, but at the same time, I don't think it was like a traumatic experience.
Did you then you went to high school wherever you live? Where
yeah,
was
in Denmark.
Yeah.
Well, when we moved back, we lived different places because it was like, where are we going to settle down? So we lived like 3 different places outside of Copenhagen.
Okay. When did you get interested in photography?
My last year of high school here. So I was around 18. I mean, earlier I'd gotten into the idea that I wasn't interested at all in like the academics, and I wanted to get more into film. And I was pretty sure I wanted to get into doing film one way or the other.
Like directing or producing or something like that?
I don't know. I don't think it was even that concrete.
Just like
get into film.
Right.
Directing, visual. I don't know. Just the film industry I found to be interesting.
Yeah.
And then like the last year of high school, I took a course in photography. And I'd been exposed to photography because my mom, when we lived in the States, did a lot of photography and went to like the dark room and came back from like her dark room with prints. And my uncle has
did you have a dark room in the house at the time?
We didn't in New York, but there was like, she went for these classes.
Right.
And my uncle has done photography as long as I remember and has been very involved in photography in Denmark.
Okay.
So I kind of like seen it, but I'd never really, connected in that sense to it. And then when I took these own classes in darkroom, I really got into it. That was like the first time in years that I actually found something that really interested me.
Mm-hmm.
I actually went to a high school that was specialized in music. So I thought I wanted to get into the film business, but the thing that really interested me was the music, like playing music. That dream of wanting to play music, but I had zero talent for it, and I couldn't play anything. And I tried desperately. Wanted to do it, but I really wanted, but like the other drummers were way better. So that never happened. And then I found, so for years, like that dream was sort of shattered because the high school is 3 years here. Mm-hmm. And so the first like 2.5 years, I was like, damn,
right.
Like this, I have nothing, there's nothing to fall back on. There's nothing I'm interested in. And then I discovered photography and I was like, wow, this is maybe even a way to get into making film.
Right.
And so that was like the last couple of months of high school. And then immediately as I got out of high school, like the first month I applied for a job in a production company to get into being like, just getting anywhere into the film, TV.
Sure.
And I got a job at this production company that's like, we can't pay you. We have no money, but we can pay you in equipment. How do you like that? And I was like,
that's really good.
I was like, I like that. Like, I can take that. Then I'll have another job. So I worked in like a small grocery store.
Right.
And like part-time, and then part-time
I was able in Copenhagen?
In Copenhagen.
Oh, okay.
And then I was able to like save up for equipment, and they gave me like my first camera, which is how I got into that. And then it slowly just took off from there.
So how'd you make the jump then after that?
Into like more with photography?
Yeah, did you go to school?
No, well, not really. I did take some. I kept working for this production company and got more and more into that and started filming more and more as like film photography. Mm-hmm. And did that for years. And I was first the assistant, and the job, or like the deal I made with the company was, okay, you pay me in equipment, but then also when you get like film photographers who come in, they have to teach me how the cameras work. I knew nothing. And so I kind of had like private teachers all the time. And then after a while, lots of the work that they were doing at this particular company was very basic. It was like lots of interview things, and which was like very easy. You have to learn how to light, basically set up a camera, how to operate it. And then after a year or two, I was like, I could do this. So I quit not knowing what to do. And then like literally 2 weeks later, the same company called me up and was like, hey, we just got funding. Not a lot of funding, but we got some funding to do. It's going to be a 4-month travel where we're visiting 4 different countries around the world. It will be you and a journalist, but you'll be working under false names because we don't have we're not allowed to be working in these different places. It was a controversial documentary on indigenous people's rights.
Wow.
In different areas. So we went to like Bangladesh, Ecuador, Greenland, and Bangladesh, Ecuador, Greenland, South Africa was the last place.
Oh.
And of course, like I was like just joyous to get any kind of work.
That's a pretty amazing opportunity.
Because I just got thrown into like the reality of not just sitting doing interviews, and it was accepted that it was a bit rough because we didn't have we couldn't bring big equipment,
the
and
whole project was
there was no
rough.
sound. Like it was just me doing the sound, and that was the best introduction. And since then, that just kind of meant that when I returned from that job, then I applied for the school, but I'd been at the school for maybe like a month or two.
What school?
Fata Morgana.
Ah, okay.
And then after a short while, then I was contacted by DR because they had seen some of this material from this other program, and they're like, hey, we need someone to go to Lebanon to do a program. It's just going to be you. There's no journalist. And they were like, at that time, not many people worked without sound, and
right.
Like usually you would be a bigger team, and most of like the old school camera people were more into like bigger cameras, and I was being taught to work on very small cameras.
Was it film or was it video?
No, it was still it was video.
Yeah.
But like it was still conservative around that time, whereas like we really want to shoot on big tapes. And I was like, I don't care about that. Like I just want to be able to get the material.
So you were kind of specialized in working that way.
So I got specialized into that without like it ever having been my.
Right.
And then I ended up doing lots of like politically based documentaries in like conflict zones and areas that were difficult to get into, where small equipment was essential. And at the same time, on all these productions, I couldn't. There was lots of time when we weren't allowed to be filming, or it was too dangerous, or the authorities were looking out for us. They're like, "Hey, you can't go out and film." And so I would bring my own like still camera equipment, and I'd always just go out as like a tourist and just take pictures. And that was then later edited into the first book I made called Wake.
So at the time, like when did it become clear to you that you were also working as an artist?
Much longer. I mean, that was years
So you just
later.
took pictures because you had the unction to do so. You felt like
I took it because I thought it was a good way of exploring the visual language of film.
Mm-hmm.
I figured if you want to be a really good film photographer, you have to know the basic idea of an image.
Composition,
light, colors, like just that kind of expression.
Mm-hmm.
You were able to capture that through still photography. You could potentially become very good as a film photographer.
You were practicing, in essence.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
And I was able to practice on stuff I didn't have to give to anyone. So I could experiment more. I couldn't experiment if we're out doing a job. It's better playing it safe.
Right.
Because if I want to get the next job.
Right. That's how it is.
But that also becomes a bit safe and a bit boring.
How old were you at this time?
Like in my early 20s. Like,
so here you are going all over the world doing interviews.
Yeah, when I was 21, I think I started working like more like seriously with.
Go ahead.
No, seriously with these like productions of traveling, and like that first job, I was young enough that we were under the alias that I was the son of my mother, who was the journalist.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you guys were just tourists, officially.
Yeah, we were tourists. I just had like an addiction to filming everything we came across,
Jesus
including
Christ.
people living in very...
I mean, so you were just essentially not afraid.
Right.
I mean, because you must have gotten yourself into some scrapes.
Sure. Like when you're... Yeah, I mean, that kind of comes with that age.
Right.
I mean, especially when it started turning more into like bullets flying and in war zones.
Right.
But
I mean, your friends or the kids you grew up with here in Denmark are here in Copenhagen just going and getting hammered every weekend.
Sure.
You know?
No. It was a very different interest in a way.
But you were living it and loving it, I assume.
Loving it.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely.
So when did you transition, or how did you transition away from that?
Well, because over the years, over the years, the programs that started getting funded, so lots of this documentary work was actually being funded by the Danish national TV, or indirectly coming from funding for programs that were going to be broadcast on TV. And then slowly there's been a transition towards more programs that were based on entertainment and, popular programs, and less about programs that have any kind of say. And so the last program I did where I realized this isn't where I want to go was a program on filming like famous Danish women riding horses over Iceland. And I was like, Christ, I can tell where this is going.
Right.
And so at that time, usually I'd stay like extra time in a certain place we went to, and this time we were in Iceland. And so afterwards, the crew flew back, and I stayed for a week, and I drove around Iceland, and I was out photographing like every night, every day. And I was like, it was such a relief finally being out. I don't know, doing again my own work. It wasn't necessarily made for any kind of artistic practice. But then I very, very specifically remember taking this very long walk into this glacier, and just that process of walking in there. I went through that whole thing of just seeing where my career was going, and that it felt wrong, and what I was doing in this exact moment, walking towards this glacier with my own equipment, felt completely right.
So that was the moment it went ding.
That was the moment it clicked. And I came back and I started writing this letter that I was going to send out to all my clients saying, you don't have to contact me tomorrow. And I was so close to posting it, and I never fortunately did, because I had later on I had to fall back on taking more work to be able to finance my artistic work. But following that trip to Iceland, I went to Finland for it wasn't really a residency. I went up there in the wintertime. I contacted someone who rents out cottages in the summer, and I was like, listen, I have this idea. I'd really like to stay in a cottage in the woods, isolated for a couple of months to work with my own things. And so this family who had this cottage was like, yeah, okay, we can see that. So they had this cottage on an island where you had to drive over the ice. It was hours away from the closest town.
Wow. And
I basically isolated myself there for 2 months and sat down. And it was the first time I took all the work that I'd been gathering for years and years and years and just sort of sift through it. Saw what's in this, what can I combine, what can I use this for, get it out of the drawers where it'd been before. And so I made a book, and I made a couple of video installations. Finally there was some products coming out of it that I was then later able to publish,
right,
and to exhibit. And that kind of naturally transitioned into getting a gallery that was interested.
So you kind of once you made the jump, it all went pretty smooth. I mean, not smoothly, but it went pretty straightforward.
It went straightforward.
Here's a body of work. I'm prepared. Sure. I am now able to present it.
Sure. But I was still financing living by then having to do TV productions.
Sure.
Which, even if they were just, entertainment, there was still something interesting that I wasn't constantly picking my own navel. Do you have that expression?
Yeah.
Over my artist, that I could go out and I could work with a team and we'd just do a job. I mean, it's actually at times now I can still miss just having some kind, even just for the fact of having collaboration with someone.
Right. It's actually important for most people to stay plugged into the world somehow or another.
Exactly.
How are we doing on time?
I should be running in
now?
3 minutes ago.
Okay. All right, it's me again. That was the end of part 1. We obviously ran out of time, like I said. So now we're going to part 2 at the airport for a different type of annoying background noise. Well, where were we? Do you remember? We got to.
I had talked about being having worked on those film shoots and how it came about, and I went to Finland. Was working on the book.
Right.
I made a book. I went to Iceland. That whole thing. Yeah, I rented the cabin and ended up making a book. I actually went there I went there with all the material that I'd done up till then, which included both video material and still photography.
And then you didn't really know what you were doing with. You just knew.
I had no idea what I was doing. but I'd set up, which I still do like today. Like I try to be fairly strict, like just keep things within like some sort of a boundary. And so I went there thinking I want to return from Finland after a couple of months, having done 4 different projects.
Wow, with the work that you already had?
Well, some of it. So one project was I wanted to go there with all the photos that I had, and then eventually boil them down to what I imagined was going to be a book. Mm-hmm. Then I went there with 100 of these 4x5 film boxes, which 4x5 comes in.
Right, the sheet film.
And my thought was I want to do a project based on these boxes, whatever that's going to be. And my initial thought was I'm going to try to get in touch with local artists in Finland and hand them each a box and like make that easy solution saying like, hey, why don't you do the project? And that would be my project.
Right.
So that was the second one. The third one was I wanted to do a video installation or some sort of a video for a video installation. And the fourth project was I wanted to work within a medium that I didn't know.
Okay.
And I hadn't defined that at the time. And so the result ended up being that I made a book that fit into those boxes.
All 4 of them. Okay. The 4x5 boxes. I got it.
So the 4x5 boxes ended up being like the kind of like the frame for the book, which made it much easier for me to even select like the size. Because if not, I was spending so much time like thinking about what size do I want the book to be?
Right.
How many pictures are there to be included? Whereas if you already have the box, then it was kind of like, all right, it has to fit into this box, right, which means it can only have this and this thickness. It can only have this and this, height and width.
Right.
And so that kind of became a combination of the book. So that book was then eventually made in 100 handmade copies that all came within their individual 4x5 boxes that on the cover, the title is stamped and on the back, they're all numbered.
Cool. What book? What was that book called?
Wake.
Okay.
And that book was then later picked up by a publisher and then, put out more. Re-released in a not so, like, exclusive with a box kind of thing. And then I ended up making a video. And for that, the medium I ended up working with that I didn't know was sound. And I made, like, the sound music side to this video.
Okay.
That ended up becoming, like, a projection that was then later shown in Belgium.
And this was your jump-off point? As like a showing artist, kind of.
It was, with that book, I still didn't work with any galleries at that point. And it wasn't until, I think, a couple of years later that I returned. Or not, I returned a couple of months later, but after a couple of years passed before I ended up actually getting in touch with any galleries. And in that whole period in between, I was still making jobs working for TV and film.
Okay.
Just being able to make a living.
Right,
so
paying the bills.
So that letter that I had intended to write saying, don't ever contact me, I'm done. I'm not anymore selling myself to this industry. I ended up, pulling that letter back and saying, hey, I'm back.
Right, here I am. I need some money. Did you have like grandiose dreams when you started? Do you think like this is it? It's on
what,
now?
As an artist?
Yeah, like I'm gonna sell as an artist. No, I can't do this. Or was it more?
I didn't have any dreams.
Pragmatic?
It was still just a continuation of the exploration of the visual medium to become better at what I was actually doing. Mm-hmm. And I've never studied art. I don't know much about. I didn't have art history. So I hadn't really built it up, I guess quite naive about the whole thing, about how difficult was it to get in a gallery, how difficult is it to find people who are actually interested in supporting you through your work.
Right. Well, how did you make that step?
I think I'm still in the process of making that step. Like it's still, I guess you have the first couple of exhibitions you're just proud that your things are hanging on the wall and there's a room that's showing your work.
Sure. But you forged a relationship at some point with like Peter Lau, for example.
Exactly. Then, I started working with Peter after or around the time when the book was being published on Steidl.
Was that the based off of the book, essentially?
Kind of, yeah. It came out of that. I guess I was showing with him before and I said like, hey, I got this publisher who's, they're publishing this book. I still haven't seen it, so I can't guarantee it, but supposedly they're going to publish it. And he, you know, went along with it, and we started, I guess my first show with him was like a small thing with another, you know, small group show. But like I say, I still feel to this day that it's still in that, you know, process where there's nothing that's like, I truly can see it's now happening.
Sure.
Like,
well, I think it's probably lifelong to a degree.
I think so.
Well, you'd hope so, really.
No, for sure. I mean, it gives, first of all, it puts some energy into your own work, and it also means that your focus point is on something else.
Right, and you need some sort of essential conflict in a lot of ways.
Right.
To work forwards.
Well, I just need to have a reason to keep working, and I mean, then I guess I was actually doing jobs up until, like, other kind of jobs on the sides up until about 3 or 4 years ago, when I started applying to do a larger project of my own, which ended up being a 1.5 year trip where I went from the North Pole to Antarctica. That was the first time I took out that long of a period of time fully dedicated to my own work. And when I returned from that, I've kind of just been dedicated to going through that material and working with that material, and I've had, you know, good possibilities of showing this work.
Right. I saw the show at the National Photo Museum, which was based off of that work, right?
Exactly. Off that project. You
know, part of the reason that we have this podcast is to talk about like how practically things work. So how did you manage to take a 1.5 years off to do this project?
I'd been showing with Peter at a show when he was based out in Valby, and the director of the museum had come by to see a group exhibition where I had some pieces in that show, and he liked that specific series a lot. And so he came to me and he said, "Listen, we're interested in showing your work at the museum if you can make 15 of these pieces." And they were quite like complex works, because they were all shot around moonlight in very difficult to get places with circumstances that were not, you know, constantly reoccurring. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I saw that to be a huge chance. And so I said, wow, to get a chance to show at the museum, I'd love to, you know, to give it a shot. And so I said, okay, I'll need to go away for like a year to do that. And then I started kind of planning this trip. And when I was small, I was always fascinated by the idea that you could travel uninterrupted from Alaska down to the tip of South America. That gradient, there's actually...
Well, there's land connection.
You can actually like connect all the way down. Then, of course, there's a part in Central America where you need to cross by boat. But basically, the Pan American Highway runs from the top of Alaska all the way down through Patagonia.
Right.
And so I started with that thought, and then I was like, okay, if you're already doing that kind of an extreme thing, why not add on like the poles?
Right, just extend it.
Extend it, and then do like, because that's a really like concrete thing, North Pole to South Pole.
Right.
And so I just started like very practically writing applications saying I have a letter of invitation for the National Museum of Photography.
Right, and that's actually the key, right? That you have
kind
an
of
exhibition.
That you need to have something that you can. I mean, I've always saved up money for all my work, and it was very late that I started actually understanding that Denmark has an amazing support system for artists.
It's unbelievable.
I mean,
if you're in the club, I mean, you have to get in you know, somehow, but once you're in, it is absolutely incredible.
No, it's insane. And I didn't know that for many, many years. So many years I was doing a job. The money that I earned on that, I would go out and I'd spend on going away for a month, shooting, buying film, buying whatever, coming back, processing all of that, and then money was up, do another job.
Right.
That was sort of the way I went about it. But around this time, I started finding out, there's actually, you can write people saying, listen, I'm interested in doing this project.
Right.
And I was able to get some funding. I wasn't able to get even close to what I had, initially thought. But enough for me to say, okay, I'm going to do this. And so I took off. And I mean, during that trip, the most important thing, because it was such a long period of time, was that I didn't slip into this just floating in nothingness. I mean, because I was basically traveling in places without other people, without having any contact to other humans,
right,
for long periods of time. And it was important for me to keep sort of like an everyday rhythm to it, and keep
yourself grounded.
Yeah, and also just keep a discipline of saying, okay, I'm actually going to shoot something every day, whether I feel like it or not. Like there's some days I just won't be inspired, but you can't use that for anything.
Right.
Like kind of think of it as if I'm working. It's work, you know? Right. And that was also, which differed from all other trips I'd done, which had, of course, an element of artistic practice in it. But this particular trip was the first time when it was like, okay, I got to think of it also as I'm doing a job here.
Right. This is my work.
And in the beginning, I took that a bit too far, and I was actually trying to shoot something that I wasn't really feeling. You know, it wasn't what was natural to me. Mm-hmm. And I could tell that my material wasn't good. And
now,
that
you're
was
shooting
actually
on film the whole time?
Yeah.
Are you just getting it processed along the way? Or
yeah,
are you just
I processed like a couple of places along the way.
Okay.
Wherever I'd look up and see if there's a lab in any city within like a vicinity that I'm heading to. But I mean, basically I could only process in Canada, in the US, in Mexico, and then I didn't process until I came to Buenos Aires like 8 months later. So there was a long stretch where I didn't process any film.
You have no idea what's happening to your film, if it's too cold, if it's too hot.
No idea. And it turned out that there was lots of like mistakes, scratches, sand in the box and stuff like that. But I've kind of later on taken that as, you know, part of that discovery, and given it its place as well.
Do you shoot only large format film?
Yeah, 4x5 and 8x10.
Wow, so you're carrying around heavy camera equipment too.
Well, I was carrying 8x10. I carried to the North Pole because I was on board an icebreaker, and you know, on the ship I could just keep the camera sort of stable up there. And then when I started, you know, traveling more lightweight, I brought the 4x5. But it's actually not heavy. I mean, it's bulky. It's a bit bulky, but if you compare it to any other camera that has a big lens, it's not anything.
Sure.
And I just have one lens.
Right.
And I have two backs, and then you have the boxes with the film.
And that was just kind of a streamlined process for
shooting,
for making images, yeah.
Well, it's always been that way.
Right.
I've never shot on anything else.
You've always shot large format. Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it certainly is a film type which is living. You know, like you say, like it shows up. The marks of your travels register on the film.
And I've never used that though. I mean, this was the first time. I usually shot slides. Because out of very practical reasons that there was a school that had gotten a sponsorship for film, or a sponsorship. I think someone had donated a bunch of slides, 4x5 slides. Some photographer probably who was moving. And the school that I was attending at that time had like, okay, we'll take it. And then it had been closed up in this closet for a couple of years. And then I just saw like, wow, I could actually have access to free film if I just get a large format camera. And the math in that was pretty easy because film is insanely expensive.
Sure.
So I rushed into town and I found where there was a 4x5 camera and bought the first one.
Which you still use today?
Which is the same one I still use today.
A field camera?
Yeah. Like an old Linoff that you can like collapse.
Right.
You just clean it with, you know, basic utensils. You're not worried that some kind of a technical thing isn't working. Sure. Everything is like you can take it out, you can separate it, put some oil in.
Right.
I mean, of course, if the glass breaks, you're screwed, but that's about it.
But this kind of touches on one of the other things I wanted to get to, which is that your work is a lot about time. And so that even reflects in the camera and the materials you use. Those also register time. It's a slow camera to use to set up, you know, relatively compared to other cameras. And then, you know, your film doesn't get developed right away. Perhaps it travels before being developed. All this. What is it? Like, it seems like that's the binding thing between a lot of your works is time. I
guess so. I mean,
or at least as that's referenced in the materials.
I think just time is a necessity for, I guess, what interests me more, which is more like the quietness. Even if the quietness is a dark quietness or the tranquility is based in something dark, you need time to be able to explore that.
Is that a personal thing?
I guess so. I mean, it's personal in two ways. It's personal in the way that I love the process of it. Like you mentioned, like the camera is very slow to use. That in itself is an amazing discovery. Not necessarily while you're taking, or when you take that picture, sure, the picture can be good, it can be bad, but usually the process around it is amazing. I used to do a lot of like night photography that would force yourself into setting up this camera and waiting 20-25 minutes. And in those 20-25 minutes, you have nothing else to do but stand by your camera and just observe.
And be like, is it ready? No. Is it ready? No.
Right.
Is it time yet?
Like
no.
you can look at your clock
guessing.
and it's like it's just counting down. And you know that for 20 minutes, you're just going to stand there.
Right.
And I've always found that to be extremely like good for me, just to be able to... I wouldn't do it if I didn't have the camera. And often the camera has been access or the excuse for some kind of an action that you wouldn't usually take. And lots of that I find comes through time. Like that, if you take time to things, something special happens.
Well, it also
and of course it reflects in the work at moments.
Well, didn't you also print on materials that faded rather rapidly as opposed to traditional photo materials?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in that sense, but that's more the, what's it called, ephemeral, that I find to be interesting, that whatever we're sitting with...
That it's transitory.
Well, one element is enjoy it while it's here, while you're sitting with it, and also enjoy the process of the fading, of it disappearing, and that you can't have it as a constant.
Right.
Those things just appeal to me. But in my video work, I mean, that's shot on video, and then, of course, I edit it to a way that it's slow, and it requires observation. It requires you to sit down if you want to actually, get something out of this.
Is this like the video shot off the icebreaker?
For example.
Yeah.
Which nothing is really happening. I mean, you can sit there and just observe.
It's more
this
of a feeling
thing that just goes through the ice, and then it backs up and it goes through the ice again. I mean, there's not a lot happening, but yet through that process I find it to be very meditative.
Right. Well, it's a reflection of your trip, right? In a way, like you were there, you experienced this, and you in a way are sharing the feeling of doing that.
But I think it would be over-romanticizing a trip by saying that this kind of... slowness, that's like how it is to do a trip. Like doing a trip like that for a year and a half sucks at moments. For many moments, it's terrible. You're sad. There's all kinds of troubles that come up.
Well, you're also faced with yourself at a very deep level.
Right. And you don't see all those slow moments. You know, I mean, that's again where I think it's interesting to then actually take it and edit it. And try to focus, whether it's your still photography or video or even sound material. Right. That you take it and then you kind of pick out those moments. And you cut out all of the, which is the same as any kind of like a movie, any kind of narrative storytelling from the movies. Right. You don't see the guy shopping at the supermarket necessarily.
But in this case, did you have a clear idea what your end project was going to look like, or were you just there to do it?
No, I was so worried when I came back. No, I had no idea. I mean, I ended up coming back with a book full of negatives that I went to the museum, and I was like, listen, I got to be honest with you, I haven't shot any of the pictures that I was supposed to shoot, because the pictures I was supposed to shoot were very like conceptual. Both with the framing and with the light, like they were very, and I ended up saying like I've done like 2 maybe, like there's no way we're gonna have a show with that. Right. And Jens, who was the director at that time, could easily have said like, well, that's too bad. That's too bad. Right. Like we're gonna move on then. Right. But he was cool about it. He's like, okay, what do you have? And I just put all like the contact sheets on his desk. I'm like, this is what I got.
That's a ballsy move.
And I was like, I have no idea what's gonna come of it. Like it might be good. It might be. I'm not even sure what I'm going to use this material for. Right. And then shortly thereafter, I received, first of all, I came back from that long trip and I was, just depressed of being back in Denmark. And like I before leaving, I'd given up my studio, the place I was living. So I came back with nothing.
Your life was essentially in shambles.
Well, the life was essentially the same as when I was away. Yeah. But it just sucks when you're actually at home and you still got to be living in a tent.
Right. And you got to figure it out.
It makes it. Yeah, it does something strange with your head. And so I had applied for a residency in Iceland, and I got that. Okay. And so I actually went to Iceland, as I had done with Finland, to sit and like just edit and think about what it was I going to show at the show. And so I went there with the negatives, and that's where the only thing that it's an amazing residency, but the only thing they had for photographers is they have a small printer, like an A4 printer, regular printer,
right,
for like printing documents. And I was like, okay, great. This is what I actually have to figure out how my work is going to look. So my thought was I'm going to print my pictures on this small one and kind of figure out what size my images are going to have. And by doing that, I'll take a large file digitally and I'll cut it up, and then I'll print out individual pieces that I'll then put together
to see the size of it.
To see the size.
Right.
And so I was working with that for a while, and then and then I'd pin them up on a big pin board, and I was like, okay, that's a good size. And then one day I came back into the studio and I looked at it. I was like, hey, this is a nice piece actually. Like, don't think about it's going to be color or anything else. Just look at what it is.
Right.
And it was like an image that had 42 individual pieces of A4 paper that made up one large image.
Right, which is how a lot of them ended up for that show.
And so I ended up actually taking that as like a good starting point for lots of the work. And then just further exploring this thing of being able to produce your work, but under less, like moving away from the whole perfection.
Right.
Because before this, lots of my work was like going to Germany and printing the perfect print. And if there was a spot on it, we'd have to redo it.
Right.
Which kind of just became an obsession, and you end up looking at the details and not looking at the overall, is this good work or is it not good work?
Right. That's a very photographic obsession. Photographers get into photography for that reason.
Of course. Because there's so much techie talk around it.
Right.
But I knew I wanted to get away from that.
Right.
And especially once I saw that my negatives were all scratched and beaten up, I was like, okay, I gotta go with it, or there's not any work here.
Right.
And so I ended up like working a lot with photocopies and going down that road instead, and like exploring this thing of being able to just mass produce, but more like being able to control it. Just that you're the one, if this doesn't look right, you discard it and you try again.
Right. Well, it makes it more of like, for lack of a better word, painterly practice or studio practice in that way, instead of being a computer, send to print, receive back, check it out, is it good enough, put in frame, up on wall. It's very hands-off a lot of times.
Well, and plus I think for me it's been important to move away, like just even within myself, away from the identity as the photography being like the main goal, whereas essentially it has been the medium that I found that I've been good at using and I've enjoyed using, but it could easily have been another medium had I, gone to explore that. And then, and so being less focused on the output needs to be very photographical. Right. More look at what it expresses within using all kinds of tools. Whether you then end up taking a photograph and you end up painting something that looks like the photograph, if that's what has the expression you want to have, then allow yourself to go down that road.
So do you see yourself continuing to go down that road? I mean, where are we now? You did that exhibition. You've moved to Argentina since.
Well, I mean, so having, now being based in Argentina has given me at least the freedom that there I find even less expectations of myself, in the sense of like, you usually take pictures like this. Like there, I don't, no one knows any of my work there. So
you don't usually do anything there.
No, nothing. So I'm able to take, it's like being on a constant sort of residency where you're able to just take that freedom to explore something you wouldn't necessarily be doing. Right. In between, I go to Europe maybe 4 times a year to produce work here for exhibitions. But a few weeks back, I had a show in Uruguay with my partner, who I run a residency and studio program with in Buenos Aires, and I was asked if I wanted to do a show in Uruguay, and I said I'd love to, but me and Tomas, we had been refurbishing an old house that we've then converted into studios the last year and a half, and he's also an artist, and so we thought, or I figured, why don't we do a show together and do something that's not just practical of like refurbishing a house, but and so we actually went there and we ended up doing a show that was more sculpture based. Okay. Where we went there and started working with wood, and you sort of start going in. And what I found out with that is that even within another medium as different as photography to sculpture, you start seeing your own similarities within the medium when you work with it. Like that show was all about like time, balance, tension.
You could say it was very Adam Jeppesen like.
In a way, but just it was just what we ended up is like having small red sculptures on the floor,
right,
and a stick on a rock that's balancing.
Right.
But you definitely sensed, and then we had some prints on the wall, but there was the same feel. I could never have foreseen that, but then afterwards I wasn't really surprised by it.
So is this the direction do you see yourself moving in the future?
I think so. I think taking more, it's going to take a lot more practice before I think I would start showing this kind of work with my gallery and saying, like, would you be interested in showing it? I mean, right now they're, you have a photo gallery too. Yes, here.
But he's flexible.
Yeah, and then the gallery in Belgium, could be showing it potentially, but no, I just think it's important that you keep exploring those things. Right. Whether it's photography or, just keep pushing those boundaries. That also keeps it, keep your own excitement going with it. Right. Well, it goes back to that idea of tension, that you have to have something you're working against. Sure. In a lot of ways. Majority of the time I find there's a lot of crap being produced by myself, but I've also seen, I guess like the art form that I often find most inspiration in is music, and within music, the bands or the artists that I find most interesting are the ones that have done like 8 crappy albums, but in between there's pearls that just go beyond, anything. Right, where it's for, all the events conspire. It's in like a when magical moment. Exactly. Or even within an album, you might have an album that has, 12 tracks and 8 of them are like mediocre. Right. But then you have 2 that's like, this is worth, of course, making a full out album that's just like works, but that's, very, very unique. Right. Well, we can wrap it up here, but I feel like, I've been thinking a lot lately about the fact that editing is key. And I don't just mean having a stack of images and editing them down, but editing your thoughts, editing your understanding of what it is you're doing, like narrowing it down. It's such a slow process to understand. Sure. At least it is for me. It takes me forever. Sometimes years go by and then I go, oh, that was what was important in that pile of shit, and that's like something I feel like as an artist, you just need to constantly hone that idea of like carving away at what is important here. It also is a question of timing, because you can be carving away at it, but the moment and the time that you're in that process might not be the right one. Totally. And then every once in a while, because I even find I'll go over some material and kind of edit it into some kind of a book or something, and I'll leave it on the table, and I'll go back and I'll look at it and I'll be like, oof, I'm glad I didn't publish that. Right. And then every once in a while you'll make something and you'll come back and you'll look at it in a year and you'll be like, wow, this is really good. And you can see with fresh eyes as if it's someone else's work. For a different reason maybe than you saw before. And it's like, this is really good. Right. But it's just important that you keep making those things, you keep editing it, like you say, putting it away, and then kind of start seeing it again later. Right. For that reason, my work is often like years. Like I'll have negatives that are lying in the stack. I know they're there for years and years and years until I take it out and I like start working at it. Right. Like I'm kind of in the last phase now with this new work, with this latest series, which is like going into the color work. But that's taken like 2 years now, and I haven't really done any color work yet. Right. Well, I think there's no better place to leave it than that. You got to go fly to Argentina now. I know. Sorry about the rush. Don't worry. Thank you so much for taking the time. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. All right. That was Adam Jeppesen, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys enjoyed the talk with him as much as I did. I really appreciate his way of exploring and, his dogged determination to figure out some of the greater questions in life about what one should do with their time and, how to interact with the world. And, the guy's walked from North Pole to South Pole, basically. So in and of itself, that's a pretty epic adventure. And he's, ended up in Argentina, and the story just continues from there. And I think the work shows that kind of explorative spirit. I think it shows the capabilities of editing. We were talking about that at the end, about editing your thoughts and focusing in on what's important and what's not important. Clearly sitting on ideas for long periods of time, gestating, can be a really good thing. And I just appreciate people who work in that quiet,
focused, driven manner like he does. So I hope one day to have him back on the show. You guys should check out his website, check out his work. He's really exploring some different types of photographic materials to work on, different modes of presentation, all that good stuff. So yeah, check it out. In the meantime, like I said, it's Easter time. It's time to go have some chocolate eggs, think about rabbits. And really what it makes me think about is Bill Hicks. I don't know if you guys know, he's a great comedian. He died many years ago, named Bill Hicks, American guy who was kind of a angry spiritual warrior, but really super talented comic, really kind of brought the art of comedy forward for his time. He wasn't even very well liked until after his death, which is, the classic story about a lot of artists who were ahead of their time and really pushing the envelope. But he tells a good story about going to Australia and discovering they also celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ by telling their children a large rabbit came in the night and left them chocolate eggs. So if you do not know Bill Hicks, please, please, please check him out. It's a mind-expanding, also gut-bustingly hilarious experience. So that's it. I'm off. I'm off to Italy. I'll catch you guys next week with another good talk. Stay tuned. Today's episode brought to you once again by the Undergang Armchair. That is us. Intro and outro music provided by Heavy Links, British hip-hop group. You can catch a link to Heavy Links on our About page on our website. And the interstitial music for today provided by Black Ant. Once again, good stuff. Link to that on the show notes page for this episode. Please come check us out on the web, undergang.net. You can holler on Twitter. The Undergang is our handle. And you can write us an email. holler@undergang.net. holler@undergang.net. And please remember, if you enjoy the show, please tell a friend. That's it. See you next week, guys. Thanks.